We good? All right, cool. So this presentation has a little bit of a prerequisite. It's a previous presentation that I built. Essentially, the idea is you want to be mildly familiar with the idea of building Drupal sites with components. So that's just if you're building Drupal sites and you're going into the theme layer, you're not just taking the default output that comes from Drupal, but you're actually building individualized components, which then you're reusing across the Drupal site. It's just kind of like next level item. This presentation itself is both like a prequel and a sequel, which puts it in a really weird space, I guess. It's not like, you know, really kind of a standalone trilogy or something like that. It's more like a Drupal story. So a long time ago in an Asheville galaxy far, far away, we have design systems the Red Hat way and how we're going to implement them. It's really kind of a three-part discussion. The first part of that is the philosophy behind all of it, and that's kind of what you need to be able to understand how you're going to build these design systems and get them implemented. So really quick show of hands, if everybody could raise them up. Go ahead, I know it's after lunch, you're all tired, put your hands up in the air. The question is, can you please go ahead and put your hand down if you have used a design system to create a website in the past? Cool. So, you guys. All right, that's cool. We can go ahead and cover some of those basics then, like using design systems, what that means for you, what the benefits are too. So we'll go through that. And then we'll go into design systems implementation itself, so that's taking all that philosophy and making it, you know, actually work and be part of your system and your process for building Drupal websites. And then finally the integration part itself, which is the code that makes the magic happen. So digital design philosophy. This is something that like the web kind of ran along without for a while, especially in the 90s and 2000s. Just kind of like, yeah, if I put a bunch of like, you know, flashy signs and GIFs, it'll be great. And then this kind of like idea that, hey, maybe we should design things and put some thought into what the sites actually look like. Started to be a little bit more important as money got involved. Go figure. So at Red Hat, our digital design philosophy is driven by our branding, marketing, and UX. And that interfaces with the design languages that we use to comprise those things along with the design systems. So they all kind of feed into a cycle into each other. So we come up with our branding guides, they inform the design language, they inform the design system, and then it continues to inform how we're developing our continuing branding, marketing, and UX items. So for Red Hat, we start out with our branding site. So this is something that we've come up with that helps us really like understand what the message is that we're giving to our customers, to our partners, to our vendors. Helps us all stay on the same page. It covers things like messaging, what sort of fonts are appropriate, what sort of colors are appropriate, what are the rules for using the Red Hat logo. All these things are just independent of even doing a website. This is stuff that kind of covers like things from business cards to posters and flyers to events and marketing, that sort of thing. So once we have this sort of documentation built up, it goes into our marketing and UX departments. And this is like a foundation pillar of communication that allows all these different groups to work together and stay on brand and on target. But we need to be able to go somewhere with that and not just, you know, talk about the cool things that we're doing. We need to be able to go into something functional that gets assembled together. We call that design systems. In order to talk about design systems, we have to understand the philosophy behind it. And that philosophy is based in two parts, the languages and then the systems itself. Design languages are visual. They're something that reinforces our communication, and they're very graphical in nature. So a design language in itself is kind of the visual medium of communicating with other humans. In particular, we're talking about websites, but this really applies to any medium. Animation, movies, TV shows, any sort of media that humans are consuming as content really is about communication. Here's some examples that we have for this. One of the first ones that pops into my head is skeuomorphic design. So that's something that Apple really popularized, especially their earlier releases of iOS. But that's the idea that in order to communicate effectively on a digital medium, you want to relate it to something in the real world. Whether it's an antique calculator you may have seen before, or a library full of books, or television. That's where you get those like really funky 2000s design. It's like, oh, check out my homepage. It looks like my office, because it is. Take a picture of it, put some links on it. And then from there we kind of evolved in the mid-2000s to using flat design. And that's the idea that the most important thing about the visual language that you're developing is the communication itself. That's the idea. You don't want to add any unnecessary information. You just want it to be exactly what people are seeing. And nowadays we have something pretty popular, which is just really an evolution of that, material design. Of course, Google introduced that. But that's the idea that if you use real-world materials, that small amount of added information really helps clarify what could be a very complicated interface. And there's a whole bunch of other new stuff that's coming out, things like vertical design, which is the idea that the main way that people interact with websites these days is scrolling. So therefore you want your design to be responsive to scrolling the mouse wheel. And all sorts of other stuff, like Airbnb has their own specific standards, Microsoft has one, US Web, which those are all available online publicly actually, and they go over what are the rules behind these visual communication techniques that we're using to interact and communicate with our users. Design systems, on the other hand, those are organizational. They're entirely about communicating with other developers, not communicating with end users. So these design systems allow you to work on a team. They allow you to bring in other people and work with your different tooling and techniques. So like a really basic example of the Drupal community is how we build themes. That's a design system. There's a set of rules as to where you're going to place your files, how you're going to organize them, and how you're going to get them into your site. And those set of rules allow you to work easily with other developers. You can share themes. There's all the stuff on Drupal.org. You can go through GitHub and find thousands and thousands of things there that are all just going to work because they use that same design system. So it's very structural in nature, essentially. Anything from directory paths to organization or naming rules, BIM, SMACs, that sort of stuff. So good examples in the design world of that are things like monolithic design. So shout out to the early 90s type websites, right? But the idea was you would come in and throw something together in Photoshop all in one place and go, all right, this is the page that I'm going to build. I'm going to do the whole thing at once. I'm going to build that page and it's good to go. We kind of moved on from that to things like modular design. So if you're familiar with like PHP or early Drupal themes, you would go in and you build these little reusable modules that essentially you clone stamped across the site, and that's you assemble all your content. Nowadays we like to do something called atomic design. If you're not familiar with that, that's something Brad Frost came up with. And that's the idea that each sort of individualized component or pattern that you're using in your design system is going to be composed of even smaller items. And that's atoms, molecules, organisms, and that'll lead up to your full page templates, and then with actual data in it, the pages themselves. So there's a lot more information on it. There's plenty of different presentations online that you can find about this stuff, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But suffice to say, atomic design is pretty much like the way we like to design stuff these days. Another good alternative to that is style tiles. They're actually very similar approaches to building modern sites. So altogether now, branding, marketing, UX, design languages, and design systems all feed back into each other in this like rotating cycle of being able to communicate both with your end users and other developers to effectively create a full design system. But those are just our building blocks, right? That doesn't lead us to a full site. So these are discussions, these are email threads, these are pieces of documentations that you might build to lead yourself to design deliverables, things like mood boards, PDFs, mockups, even things like pre-built themes, or taking any of those in. You can take a pre-built theme and create a design system around that. So we have these design deliverables, we have a design visual language, design system, and the branding, marketing, UX behind it. And the real question is, how do we get from all of that to getting a working implementation, right? At this point, it's maybe a collection of documents and some philosophy and discussion, right? This is where we get to the good stuff. For implementing design systems, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. Essentially, there are rule sets, which are taking all of those pieces of documentation and putting them together. And then there are design guides and full implementation. So rule sets are things like the docs that I mentioned, PDFs or whatever, things like style guides, which you might be generating in like KSS Node or Hologram. And then there's the full implementations, which are things like pattern libraries, full frameworks, anything from Bootstrap to Foundation by Zerb, or any of the other existing like pre-built items out there. Like there's React component libraries now. All of those have an existing design system and visual language that are predefined, And you can take those, bring those into your system, make a couple modifications, and start that as like a really solid base for implementing a design system. At redhat, our design system is based around a series of frameworks, so most of these are closer to the full implementation side. We have a couple different ones, and that's kind of the magic of what we've built, is that you can come in and understand the marketing, branding, UX, and visual language all apply to these design systems consistently across all of Red Hat's properties. So they're all in brand, they're all going to match up to each other. One of the big ones is WEBRH. So this is a style rule set and implementation. It's Sass, CSS, Twig patterns, and JavaScript. So these are the files that are actually implementing all these design systems. But on top of that, they're going to have the documentation there to actually explain, like, what's the reasoning behind why we decided to do a pane this way, and if we're doing like a story, where's the text position? There's going to be documentation in that. Downside being that it is complicated. There's a lot to it. It also includes editors and builders. So these are just tools that allow our developers to more easily stay inside the design system that we've created. And they're very tightly coupled together. So I can give you guys an example of that in a couple minutes here. But essentially the idea is we looked at our design system and the visual language that we were bringing in and said, hey, all of this needs to be in one place. There needs to be one tool that we can go to that says, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, here's how to do it, and a sample implementation, so you can literally copy paste that code and get that working in a Drupal site. And here's an example of kind of what that looks like. So WEBRH here, this is essentially a version of PatternLab. This is kind of built in-house, but there's a lot of stuff that we're contributing back to PatternLab now. One of the things we have is like a schema editor, so you can bring in an existing pattern that you've built and kind of tweak it on the fly and see like different variations of it and how it could work together with other patterns in your design system. There's a little bit of a closer look at what this looks like on the Drupal side here. So this is just using a paragraphs module. But essentially, we can take any of those components, you would go in and kind of tweak out like how you want to configure it, and then run an importer script. And this importer script will pull in all the paragraphs you need with all the fields already pre-configured, background color, different options like if you want it fixed or scrolling, be able to actually put in those images and different text and stuff that'll end up on the front end. We also have an open source design system, and this is PatternFly. And it also includes a full implementation, so it's not just the design system itself, but it's a rule set and a guide. It includes a whole bunch of Sass and documentation. It's Bootstrap based, so there's already that sort of framework there powering it. It's scalable and it's completely skinnable. We've actually used this on RCUE as well as a couple other properties at Red Hat. And it's really quick, like within a week you can have essentially a full UI up with a single developer on a site. And it's easy to host like in platforms like OpenShift. So like I said, it's completely open source, patternfly.org. There's even a new really cool, using all the latest web tech version that's coming out pretty soon. There's a couple of betas, I think, available on GitHub. But this is something you can go and bring in and say, hey, I want to make this part of our design system. I really like this visual language. I like the way it communicates to our users. We're just going to change things like maybe some of the colors and other items like logos and stuff to make it in brand with the UX and UI experience that we want to offer our customers. My team specifically has its own framework that also works in connection with all of these things. So we're not only using and writing our own patterns, but we're bringing in WEBRH, which is guaranteed to be in brand. We're bringing in the branded version of PatternFly. So all these components are coexisting on the same Drupal pages across our sites. So it's both a style rule set and an implementation. We have Sass, the compiles to CSS that we're using for this, as well as Twig patterns, JSON schema to allow the Drupal site to understand all the data that's being passed to it, as well as full YAML documentation. So when you pull these patterns into Drupal using a tool called PatternKit, which I'll get into in a little bit, it can actually understand and display to the end user all the things that we were talking about earlier, the documentation, the design rules, and styling. It is a very dev-centric framework, so this isn't necessarily going to be open source, but the tooling behind it is, and in fact is already available online. So this is a little bit what it looks like. We use case node on the front end as a tool to compile it up, but there's a whole lot of glue code sitting in between, and some of that is available online. So part 2, though, to this implementation is getting people to actually use it, right? You can go and download all these Drupal modules and you can hook them up to your site. So, oh yeah, we got PatternLab running and we got PatternKit connected up here. We're using the UI patterns module. and everything is, you know, super hunky-dory, and you're like, I'm the only person on the team that knows how to do this stuff. Great. How am I going to get anyone else to jump into it? So that's kind of the second challenge that we really address at Red Hat, and that's with adoption, education, and tooling. So adoption is selling it to the business, right? You can go off on your own, download these modules, get them running, or even get that running in an instance of the site you're working on. But the business itself is still going to know, like, why are we doing this? Why are we taking the time? You know, why are we spending the time to do it? So one of the tools that we use for that is cost studies and comparisons. So one of the things we did is with our WEBRH site, which powers the .com for Red Hat, redhat.com, we went and had a marketing page that needed to be updated. And we made this pitch like, let's do this one-off rebuild of it. We're going to rebuild it using design system, using PatternKit, and get all this stuff up for comparison. So we rebuilt the page and then took a look at the hours involved. And it's like, hey, our regular like Drupal style build where we had to go in and theme everything afterwards, well, that took our developers like 4 or 5 days, and it was a team of 3 people. And it was a pain in the butt because you had to build all these massive amounts of new templates and all this interactive stuff that needed to be used. And then we took a look at the one that used our existing components, the WEBRH library. And I was like, hey, one person did this in about 4 or 5 hours. That's a massive benefit to the business, right? So that's an easy selling point. Like, hey, you let us do this, you know, one-off build, and look, this is all the benefit we had. Let's just continue doing this in the future. And then, of course, there's the problem of selling it to the developers. So once you sold it to the business, you need to get your teammates on board. So one of the things we started at Red Hat was a scrum of scrums. We get all of our different teams together, get representatives that are interested from these teams, and get them to talk to each other. So this is just a once-a-month, 1-hour meeting, but it makes all the difference in the world. Because now we have teams who are sitting there, you know, like building a new product going, man, we're not really opinionated about the UI for this, like we just need something to work. And previously they would just kind of go online and, you know, find something for the team. But now with the scrum of scrums, they can go, hey guys, what do you suggest? And we can be like, hey, well the Connect team actually has a PatternFly implementation that's branded and themed. All you have to do is clone this Git repository and all of those components and patterns are available to Drupal. And we're like, all right, sounds like a good idea. And it does allow us to learn from other teams. So taking that approach of instead of saying like, hey guys, you need to build everything this way, instead offering solutions to those problems and learning about what other teams are doing really helps kind of sell and get everybody on the same page. Finally, the documentation, right? So you have your business sold on it, you have your developers sold on it, everyone's kind of gung-ho about using UI patterns or PatternKit and all this new stuff in Drupal, building sites with components. But they're not going to quite remember your, you know, hour-long presentation. They're going to have to go look it up on YouTube or something like that. So in our case, the way we do it is we include all our documentation with the style guides that we're generating with Pattern Lab or KSS Node or PatternKit. And we're really kind of focused on the idea of making these hosted. So this shouldn't be something that like you're a developer, you're sitting down, you got to spin it up on your local machine to understand all the documentation or how these systems work together. Instead, there should be a single repository that is always available, always hosted online, where you can go to that URL and explore and look through the system. And then of course the knowledge share. So the presentations themselves are pretty important for kind of selling people on the initial ideas and getting everyone on board and understanding where you're going. So onto the meat of the stuff. This is all the things that actually interact with Drupal. Our current setup is kind of a little bit complicated. There's a lot of words there. I'm not reading them out. But this is kind of where we're heading with this. We're taking a lot of the stuff that we've learned, all of the things that we've built in-house, and going, where does it make sense to contribute this back to the open source community? So we've kind of settled on using Pattern Lab because a lot of that code base is shared with some of our internal stuff, contributing things back like a schema editor. We're using Composer to bring in all these different pattern libraries, so they're just Git repositories, using Composer to bring them in. And we're using Gulp and PatternKit to do our compilation and processing through Drupal. Alternative to PatternKit would be the UI patterns module, which I'll cover very briefly. All of our patterns are built in Twig, but you could use nunchucks or handlebars or anything like that. We just use Twig because it's really easy to work with Drupal. Most of our sites are Drupal. And in the rare instance where we're building something like in React or something like that, there are plugins available, things that allow us to parse Twig and turn that into JSX and things like that. So this is kind of our goal here, is to unify these dev tools, get them contributed back to the open source community, and continue our training and maintaining of them. So the Drupal integrations. There's essentially 2 ways to do this if you're not downloading a Drupal module, right? One of the ways is to write a bunch of pre-processed functions. Another way is to use a model view presenter layer Twig presenter. which all it does is say, hey, I have a pattern library. This is declared in my libraries.yaml file in Drupal 8 or whatever. I want you to grab in our design system the atom for image, and I want to toss over these things from Drupal. So this is natively Drupal information. These are the things you're going to be able to access in your template, and all we're doing is just passing them along, saying, okay, well, image goes over to the source attribute, attributes goes over to attributes, etc. It's a one-to-one mapping kind of across. This allows us to be dynamic about the data that we're presenting over from the back end to the front end. Another option is to use the UI patterns module. So this is a really great module for a use case where your front end and your back end are one-on-one aligned. So if your data model for like an article, for example, is going to 100% match whatever your design is that you're handed from your design team, this module makes perfect sense. There's multiple integrations. It allows you to do things like override display suite, override views. So you can take a component library, like one you can grab off of GitHub, or any other one that you're using with other projects at your team or in your company, and import them into Drupal as things like paragraphs or mappings with display suite. And it just works right out of the box with Pattern Lab, as well as a couple of other tools out there. So if you're grabbing a theme, there's a lot of really cool ones out there that have come out this year alone that's based on Pattern Lab. You can drop that into your Drupal site, load up the UI patterns module, import them all into the system, and you don't have to sit there writing templates for days just to get things to display. PatternKit is something that Red Hat's kind of invested in. We have a Drupal 7 version that's kind of massive. It includes a REST server. It powers a whole lot of the WEBRH stuff and .com, Connect team, that sort of stuff. So it's a little bit overcomplicated right now for other teams to use, but the toned down version is available on Drupal.org for Drupal 7. We're in the middle of working on a Drupal 8 port. The reason for using this module is where you have a data model that's existing that's already a little too complicated to have a one-to-one mapping to your front end. So let's say you have a massive library of products or interlinked help documentation, and there's a whole bunch of entity references between things. And each of these different entities in Drupal has all sorts of large amounts of taxonomy. You need to be able to dynamically pull that data to your front end. Normally you'd be stuck writing like a block plugin or spending a lot of time writing pre-processed functions. With PatternKit, With PatternKit, it does all the data mapping for you. So it's going to ingest the patterns, it's going to understand the schema in your Twig files that you're using to build up your component libraries, and it's going to let you go ahead and specify the items that you're bringing in. So we can take a normal component that's just like, a red back display, and either pull in text, or we can pull in items like tokens from Drupal, and say, go ahead and parse this. It's going to understand that and be able to pull it in and display it on the front end. I'm going to do a demo of that stuff real quick. One second as I get it all spun up real quick. All right. So here we have a UI patterns module just running on a straight up out of the box Drupal install. What I've gone ahead and hooked up with it is the Zerb Foundation patterns theme, along with the out of the box configuration patterns. So what that does is provide a whole bunch of Twig patterns from the Zerb Foundation marketing library. This isn't something you have to sit and configure or anything. You literally just grab these modules, grab the theme, and it all just kind of works. So obviously there's a whole bunch of styling missing. I didn't spend the time to go ahead and make all that look nice, but this stuff is completely out of the box. It just works. So the menu system, all that displaying out from an existing set of pattern libraries. So these are all the ones that come with it. And the idea here is that you could actually grab more. There's a Zerb Foundation's advertising suite, and there's a whole bunch of other suite of components that you can literally just grab the repos and pull them into your theme. and they're going to show up here in your library with all the documentation, with all the explanation of how things work, with little examples. And these are things that you don't have to build yourself. Somebody else already built them. The only thing you really need to do is go into the styles and update it, so it matches what you're doing for your brand and for the message that you want to get across. So I'm going to go ahead and demo editing this real quick. And let's just swap out an image. So, and again, just to reiterate, I didn't spend any time configuring these paragraphs. I didn't spend any time building these patterns. I didn't do anything except pull these modules down and enable them in the Drupal UI, and there we go. And these are all completely configurable on the back end. Go ahead and show you some of the paragraph stuff. So yeah, and these are just the modules here that I enabled to get all this functionality out of the box. So all of these paragraphs kind of come with it. The foundation patterns configuration module provides all that. It gives you all these existing items that show up here. All the marketing paragraphs just come from the foundation patterns configuration marketing module. And all of them are already pre-configured with the UI patterns module. Just work with the patterns that are provided in your system. You can go in and tweak any of these. You can go in and just edit the YAML files that give the documentation information. You can go ahead and just edit the twig files and customize them to your liking. So you're already like 9/10 of the way to being able to build a site with these components without having to do pretty much any work of your own. And that's just this particular theme here. And the only thing I really did for this this test entity, just that home page there, is I added one field with paragraphs and just said, all this stuff is good. All these existing paragraphs that are mapped over with UI patterns are good to go. So this is WEBRH, and this is, again, built on Pattern Lab, and this is stuff that we're going to be essentially contributing back to the community here. But we can take, any one of these examples here. It'll go ahead and generate using sample data an existing pattern, a pattern that's in use on both the .com site, the Connect site, our developer site. Like, we're all using the same repository and pulling this up to our front end.
You guys using this for campaign landing pages?
Yeah, all of our one-off marketing builds, everything, it uses this component library. And I mean, this is all stuff that you can essentially use today, whether it's the UI patterns module or if you want to do data mapping over with a pattern kit.
Yeah, it's almost like you can almost get to the point where just the marketer can say, okay, I have all these paragraphs with the legal approved text and images and mix and match the.
No, that's exactly what they do. And in fact, our designers spend more time probably going through our list of existing patterns and assembling. So a lot of these you can just import directly into Sketch, if that's the program you're using, and just kind of assemble them, and you can get immediately feedback on a mock-up without doing too much, and get your feedback from wherever your stakeholders are. And let's see, where am I on time? Do I have time to do my pattern kit?
Could you add a page to show what that looks like?
Add a page to...
Just like the add page form.
Oh, like on the
like
UI patterns?
Field, like in action. That paragraph, but yeah.
As far as like adding a field.
Like add content.
Oh, yeah, sure. There we go. Being a little bit slow, taking a nap. So, and again, this is just with one field on it, right? But you could split things up by multiple fields. Like if you want to organize this for your marketers or something like that, and you want to limit them, like, oh, the first field on here should only be, header type stuff. So the only thing is they get to access is like a top bar or a splash page component. You can do that. So like a height, here's the hero section, right? So.
the paragraphs module team in their new UI stuff that they're working on?
We're aware of it, but we're actually trying to move away from paragraphs as much as possible, because what we're finding out is we either have a lot of static content that needs to go out, and in that case we want to write it in something like Markdown, something that's more developer friendly, or we have marketing pages, and in that case, like, we're building up these pages from the ground up, and we're going to be using PatternKit instead of paragraphs to provide that data, because the marketing blurbs already exist, you know, and so they're in a body field in different pages and things like that.
Also set you up for decoupling.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, we have a couple of React apps that do their own thing and want to be able to use these components. So there you go. I mean, obviously the component isn't, you know, styled or anything, but the items are here, right? And you can do things like go in and, you know, add a hook to limit the size of images on your fields or that sort of stuff, right? It leaves that up to you. So, but all of that, you know, markup and everything is coming, you know, out of the box where it needs to go. Give me 1 second to pull up PatternKit. It's the problem with working at Red Hat. You got like 300 plus Docker containers running, and you got to keep telling them to wake up and go to sleep when you need them.
It's said that you guys broke a golden rule with product naming, which is always think about what people can modify your product name to be if something goes wrong, aka OpenShift.
Yeah. We have a really good team on OpenShift though, so I haven't had too many
So
complaints.
nothing will go wrong. Cool.
Knock on wood. So this is PatternKit. PatternKit is built on Page Manager, both Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 compatible. It's a full plugin system, and let's see, it's going to actually load up here. It essentially allows us to create, using existing tooling, anything we want out of our system. So like here's just an example one that's already pre-configured and added, but I can go into add content here, and down at the bottom I have all these PatternKit libraries. So each one of these is its own repository with like all the examples that you've seen previously. So like WEBRH, for example, has its own repository here, so we can pull those items out and just display them immediately on the page. I need to make that a little bit bigger. The Drupal 7 panels doesn't like large text. So we can go in here and just pull in any of these existing components. Let's see if I got one that won't take forever to demo.
So this has come a long way. Basically tried out, they had a presentation, I think, when you guys were starting on this path of having reusable panels.
Yeah, WEBRH from many years ago. Go ahead and data save. Make sure that's correct. So that's added, and again, this pulls all of the items from the theme section, from the layouts, and as long as you have something that's compatible with Page Manager, you can do all the dragging and dropping and local editing that you need to. So there we go, using a pre-existing hero title and headline, all from that WEBRH repository. So, and this is stuff that's created and maintained by our front-end team, right? And they don't have to be, concerned with Drupal or how it works or anything like that. They're just writing Twig or Nunjucks and the documentation for it. And then PatternKit's just able to pull it in and get it working on our page. Couple things to note. We're using Twig for D7, but there are a couple issues with that. So if you are going the D7 route and you want to add this to an existing site, it's possible. It's not complete insanity. It's definitely a doable thing, but you do need beta 3 and a couple patches, and all of those are documented in the issue queue. So I mean, they're available. You just got to be aware it's not a complete walk in the park yet. Zerp Foundation has some node stash issues. So depending on what version you have installed, you want to go in the issue queue and make sure that you're using the right command for that. And the base theme itself, it's recently gotten updated, but they haven't. The dev branch is updated like every 2 weeks or something, but they haven't made a release in a year. So you basically want to tag yourself over to the dev branch when you're installing these themes. And of course, Drupal theme builds are still very complicated. It's not just like in the JS world. In some cases, you can just run npm or build and everything just goes. But we're working on it. We're getting ourselves there. Which kind of leads us to future, where is all this going, right? So you can grab these modules today, you can get things kind of working, which is really cool and exciting, but then people start asking questions like, what about React? What about so this is all server-side rendering, what about client-side rendering? So, and that's where PatternKit kind of comes in. PatternKit has code and tooling that we're working on to allow us to not only use Twig components, but React components, universal web components, anything you can throw at it, even a standalone view component or something written just in vanilla JavaScript. These are all things that PatternKit will be able to support, bring in, and then say, let's server-side render them, get them out on the client side, and then React can pick it up. So whenever it attaches itself to the DOM, all it has to do is pull from that component library, which can either be served off a REST endpoint or just exist as items that are delivered from the server side of the initial request, and re-render those pages, all transparently, all without having to really mess with anything on the back end. So, action checklist. First thing is start with your visual language, start with your UI, UX, and marketing. Start with getting your design systems in place and understanding your communication. And the best way to be able to do that and have the structure you need is to be able to choose your style guide, library, and frameworks. Again, we recommend Pattern Lab, but there's things like Hologram or Storybook that work just as well, same with KSS Node. And then for your Drupal integration, choose UI patterns or PatternKit, and use those to import and ingest your patterns that are existing in your design systems and your libraries into Drupal. If you want to get involved, these links will be up and available after this presentation, but there's a roadmap on the Drupal Pattern Lab GitHub repository. That's essentially a whole bunch of different groups from the Drupal community who are all kind of funneling themselves towards this vision of being able to build these reusable component libraries that exist and work with an existing design system and visual language, and allow you to just easily and effortlessly scaffold up Drupal sites with them. If you want to get involved on the Pattern Lab side of things, there's a link here. There's an issue for getting all the stuff that Red Hat's been working on back and contributed to the community, including things like the schema editor, as well as some additional functionality like a one-stop installation. You don't have to sit there and edit a config file. It'll just understand that it needs to work with Drupal. A whole bunch of resources here, including some of the patches that you'll need if you're using Twig for Drupal 7. One of the other really nice projects that we use at Red Hat is Theme Key. So we have some pages where it's very easily we want to be able to switch the styling on the components because, this is a developer page. So now we're using black backgrounds and white text and some of the blue highlights instead of red. So Theme Key allows us to just very easily swap between those groups of component libraries and styling. This is some of the commands that I use to build everything. And get those demos up for you guys. I wasn't going to sit there and make you watch a terminal screen run, but all that's there in case you want to use it. And special thanks to all the people that helped contribute to make all this technology possible. Do we have any questions?
So you mentioned that once you once you turn on PatternKit, you get all of these paragraphs and stuff out of the box, and then from that point, you can make configurations.
The UI patterns module, yeah.
Yeah, but I assume that once you make configurations, then you have to, if you're doing so, then you would have to collect those configurations yourself, and that would be stored in like your config export
Yes,
files.
yes, that's all saved to the database or configuration export.
At that point, if you guys are making changes then to those patterns, if something gets updated, how do those changes get propagated, or do they?
So UI patterns handles that in two separate ways. You can enable caching for your patterns, and then it'll just work with the one that you originally have cached. Second is it'll alert you to schema changes when you're editing. PatternKit has those same options. By default, though, we're already caching everything, so you don't have to worry about like out of the box. Oh, our designer went in and made all these updates to these, changes to our repository, and then it got implemented, and we don't know how to map anything anymore, so we got to go back in and edit stuff. No, all of that data is cached, all of that's versioned, and all of that's kept within the Drupal site itself. So when you want to go and make an update, you can manually decide, hey, I want to move to the latest version of this pattern, or I want to keep the cached one that's in on the system. And it'll alert you to that when you're using Page Manager and editing. Good question. Anyone else? Cool.
Sorry. Do you guys have a system for going through and like updating your existing pattern library? Like, do you go reassess it every couple of months and cull components that aren't being used, or add ones that you found you've had to work around, or?
So we use Composer to keep the repositories themselves up to date. So I know a lot of places, like, they'll just kind of manually run Composer update when they need to in their security releases or something, so it'll be caught in that. For us, we have a cron job that runs all that stuff nightly, and spits everything out in the morning, so we can go look and see like, oh, all this stuff is updated, and these things need QA for our next release and that sort of stuff. So we don't have to worry about that. As far as handling the updates to like the actual repositories themselves, each team maintains its own thing. So the .com marketing team, they maintain WEBRH. My team, we maintain the Connect repository that has all these application type components. The customer portal team maintains, their stuff. The PatternFly team maintains PatternFly. So all of that pruning and like deciding, where we want these patterns to go, where they need updates and stuff, is on a team by team basis. And because we're using PatternKit, it's cached, so we don't have to worry if something goes away, and we have that data, and that's saved locally on the Drupal install.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Have you heard anything about using Layout Builder to pull some of the stuff in, or is it still way too early in that process?
It's too early for us to be concerned about it necessarily, but yes, we've turned on the module in Drupal 8 and played around with it and gone, wow, everything just works. So far,
Yeah.
so good, right? But we're not insanely on Drupal 8 right now. Like when we spin up new stuff, it's Drupal 8, but a lot of our existing architecture is all in Drupal 7, has massive code bases, so we're being very careful about what we're migrating, kind of like on an item by item basis. Any other questions? All right, cool. Thanks guys so much.